It started with a sound thin, desperate, barely audible above the wind scraping across the cracked windows of the roadside diner. Sarah Mitchell looked up from the plate she was scrubbing, her fingers raw beneath yellow gloves, and frowned. It was almost midnight. Roscoe's grill was closed. The lights dimmed, the silence stretching across the worn vinyl booths like a tired sigh. But outside, something moved. She stepped closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. That's when she saw them, a tall man in an expensive coat standing beside a luxury black SUV, its hood open, steam rising into the cold night air. In his arms, a boy maybe 8 or 9 years old, limp, bundled in a red jacket, his head resting unnaturally against the man's shoulder. The man turned slowly, his face tight with panic, and scanned the empty road like someone looking for a miracle dot. Sarah didn't hesitate. She threw off her gloves and pushed through the door, the wind biting through her threadbare sweater. The man's eyes snapped to hers as she approached, cautious but purposeful. "Are you okay?" she called out. He looked down at the boy, his arms, then back at her. "He's burning up. He can't breathe properly. I was driving to the children's hospital, but my GPS took me through this back route. The car overheated, and there's no signal." Sarah's heart dropped. She looked at the boy. His cheeks were flushed to red, his breathing shallow, lips tinged with blue. Fever, respiratory distress. She didn't need a medical degree to see it was serious, life-threatening. "There's a clinic about 20 miles up the road," she said, almost on instinct. The man's eyes widened. "Can we call someone? A cab, an ambulance, anything?" "No cell service out here." She pointed to her pocket. "Mine's just a glorified calculator once you leave town." The man looked around, as if expecting help to emerge from the shadows. Nothing, just trees and silence. "I'll carry him," Sarah said suddenly. The man blinked. "What? I'll carry him. I know the way. I used to walk it to get Noah's meds before I had a bike. It's downhill most of the way, through the trail. We'll be faster on foot." "You can't. 20 miles. "I can." She didn't wait for him to agree. She reached for the boy gently, and to her surprise, the man didn't resist. The child was burning with fever, his small body trembling, breath catching in short, wheezing gasps. Sarah adjusted him in her arms, held him tight against her chest, and started walking. She didn't look back. The cold night pressed against her like a weight. With each step, the boy grew heavier, not just in her arms, but in her chest, like a responsibility she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. The trail was dark, flanked by woods that whispered with every gust of wind, the dirt path uneven beneath her battered sneakers. Sarah didn't know the man's name, didn't know the boy's, but none of that mattered. She knew what it meant, to be helpless, to feel time slipping away, while the world offered nothing but closed doors and dead ends. Once, years ago, her younger brother Noah had nearly died when his lungs collapsed during a seizure. She had screamed for help, banged on every neighbor's door in their rundown apartment complex, until an old woman finally drove them too slowly, too shakily to the county ER. No one had come for them then. No stranger had appeared to save the day. So tonight, Sarah would be the stranger. The boy whimpered in her arms, his fingers twitching. She adjusted him, whispered, "Hang in there, okay, we're gonna get you help." She didn't stop walking, mile after mile past the trail, winding through thickets and over shallow creeks. Her arms screamed in protest, her legs trembling with exhaustion. But she kept going. The only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of her feet on gravel and the boy's raspy breathing. Halfway through the trek, she paused near an old wooden bench, sweat dripping down her back despite the chill. She shifted the boy in her arms, sat carefully, and touched his forehead, still burning. From the corner of her eye, she saw the man approaching. He must have been following from a distance, trying to catch up. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said, panting. His expensive shoes were ruined, jacket stained with mud. "You don't even know who I am." Sarah looked at him. "I don't need to." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "His name is Jameson. He's my son." Sarah smiled faintly and looked back at the boy. "Nice to meet you, Jameson." The man hesitated again, then offered his name. "I'm Mark Clayton." She didn't react, didn't know the name, didn't care. "Can you keep up?" she asked. Mark nodded, though he was clearly exhausted. They continued, side by side, through the final stretch. Trees thinned, lights flickered in the distance. The county clinic, a small building perched at the edge of town, glowed like a lighthouse in the darkness. Sarah picked up speed, ignoring the burning in her calves, the ache in her shoulders, the trembling in her arms. She burst through the doors of the clinic just as a nurse was preparing to close for the night. The moment the nurse saw the boy, everything shifted. Code blue, oxygen, fever control. Doctors emerged. Mark gave his name and insurance details. Sarah stood in the corner, arms empty now, watching as they worked to save Jameson's life. Then, just like that, the room cleared. They'd stabilized him. Mark turned to her, disbelief in his eyes. If you hadn't. Sarah shook her head. He'll be okay. That's all that matters. Mark didn't respond right away. He just stared at her as if seeing something he didn't expect. Not in a small-town waitress with holes in her shoes and grease on her jeans. You don't know who I am, he said again. You already said that. I run Clayton Enterprises, real estate, investments, media. He exhaled. People don't help me, not without asking for something in return. Sarah gave a tired smile. Maybe they should. Mark reached into his wallet and pulled out a black card. Sleek, weighty. She recognized it immediately. I want you to have this, he said. She laughed, confused. A credit card. No limit. Use it. Change your life. You saved mine. Sarah's smile faded. She looked at the card, then back at Mark. I didn't do it for that. I know. That's why you deserve it. He pressed it into her hand. She didn't argue, just stared down at it, wondering if this moment was real. A boy nearly died. She carried him 20 miles. And now, she was holding something she never imagined having. Not just a piece of plastic, but the possibility of something more. And yet, that wasn't the most life-changing part of that night. It was what she would discover in the days to come about Mark, about Jameson, and about herself, that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about fate, sacrifice, and the unexpected roads that lead us home. Because sometimes, the longest walk doesn't just save a life, it reveals your own. It had been 48 hours since the clinic lights had faded behind her. Sarah still hadn't used the card. It sat quietly on her kitchen table, untouched, glinting under the flickering bulb above. Its smooth, black surface seemed almost out of place in her tiny apartment, like a puzzle piece dropped into the wrong box. In this world of cracked tiles and creaky floors, the card didn't belong. Or maybe, she didn't belong with it. Noah rolled out of his room in his wheelchair, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You're staring at it again. Sarah blinked, startled, and laughed. I guess I am. Is it real? She shrugged. Feels real. Looks real. I haven't even tested it. You should, Noah said, wheeling closer. You deserve something good. But Sarah wasn't sure. Good things always came with strings, and she'd spent her whole life learning how to untangle herself from knots she didn't tie. Mark had called just once after the hospital. He left a voicemail thanking her again, saying he hoped she'd find a use for the card, and that he meant every word. She hadn't called back, not because she didn't want to, but because something about that night still clung to her. Not just the boy's fever or the way the road had stretched into forever. Something didn't sit right. And then, 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, no stamp, just folded paper shoved under the door. Sometime in the early morning, she opened it carefully. You don't know who he really is. Be careful who you save. No signature, no explanation. Sarah stood in her kitchen, rereading the note, heart thudding quietly in her chest. A chill swept down her arms. She had met Mark Clayton as a father desperate to save his son, a man whose wealth had meant nothing when the road left him stranded in the dark. But this letter hinted at something else, something hidden. She shoved the paper into a drawer and told herself to forget it. But she couldn't. By noon, her curiosity won. She slipped the black card into her jacket and rode the bus to the nearest bank branch to verify if it was legitimate. The woman at the counter ran it through and blinked twice. I've never seen this tier before. The teller murmured. You've got authorization on all levels, no spending limit, priority access, executive status. Sarah's mouth went dry. So it's real. The woman nodded. More than real. Sarah left the bank in a daze. She could buy groceries, fix the wheelchair, get Noah proper therapy. She could even pay for school again. But the voice in the back of her mind whispered louder than ever now. Be careful who you save. That night, she sat on the couch beside Noah and scrolled through her old tablet, searching for Mark Clayton. It didn't take long. His face was everywhere. Business, magazines, awards, interviews. But what caught her breath was the headline halfway down the page. Clayton Corporation under investigation. Whistleblower claims cover-up, financial abuse, and medical negligence in Pediatric Research Division. Pediatric. Her eyes zeroed in. Jameson was a child. She clicked the article. The claims were unconfirmed, the source unnamed. But the allegations were dark. A former employee claimed that one of Clayton's subsidiaries had misused clinical trial protocols on underprivileged children, overseas children, whose families were never told the full truth. If true, it wasn't just corporate greed, it was cruelty. Sarah shut the tablet. Shaken. Was that the secret the letter warned her about? The man who had looked her in the eye, whose hands had trembled as he held his son, might be responsible for hurting other children, but Jameson, his fever, his fragility, that had been real, hadn't it? The next day, Sarah walked into Roscoe's Grill just before her shift, expecting everything to feel smaller than it had before. Instead, she found an envelope waiting for her behind the counter. No one saw who left it. Inside were 2 photos. The first was of Mark Clayton shaking hands with a man in a lab coat. The second was harder to look at. A small girl, no older than 7, sitting on a clinic bed, eyes dull, hooked up to tubes. The back of the photo read, Trial 1 for C. She didn't make it. Sarah folded the envelope carefully and tucked it into her apron. She couldn't breathe. Whatever truth she had stumbled into, it was bigger than she thought. She had saved Jameson, but maybe, just maybe, Jameson needed saving from his own father. That night, she went for a walk through the same trail where she had carried the boy. The trees stood still, their bare limbs reaching upward like questions with no answers. What do you do when a miracle carries a shadow? She had acted without hesitation that night, and maybe that was right. Maybe kindness never needs a reason. But now she had to know the truth. Not just about Mark, not just about Jameson, but about herself, and what kind of woman she was going to be now that the world had changed. Because some roads don't end when you arrive, they begin when you ask why you were on them in the first place. The past never really stays buried. It just waits silent, patient for the right moment to come knocking. For Sarah, that knock came 3 days later in the form of a black sedan idling outside Roscoe's Grill. It wasn't from around here. The windows were tinted, the tires too clean for these dust-bitten roads. She noticed it immediately, even through the steam curling from a fresh pot of coffee. The car didn't belong, and neither did the man who stepped out of it. He was tall, well-groomed, no tie, but his shirt was pressed so sharply it could slice. He walked like someone who expected doors to open before he reached them, and that's exactly what happened when he pushed into the diner. Everyone stopped talking. His eyes swept the room once, and then he looked directly at Sarah. Double quotes. Ms. Mitchell, he said, with a politeness so tight it was almost threatening. My name is Connor Vance. I work with Mr. Clayton. Her stomach dropped. Can we speak privately? She glanced at her manager. He was already pretending not to see. No one was going to interrupt this. She nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, and led the man to the back hallway near the pantry. The lights flickered overhead. I understand you've recently come into possession of one of Mr. Clayton's personal business cards, he began. He asked me to ensure you're using it properly. Sarah frowned. I haven't used it at all. Then I'm sure he'll be disappointed. His voice was calm, too calm, like a threat wrapped in velvet. She crossed her arms. Tell him I didn't ask for it, and I don't owe him anything. There was the briefest flicker in the man's eyes, something cold. People who do favors for Mr. Clayton, he said, usually understand the importance of discretion. Digging into his affairs is not encouraged. So that was it. The letter, the photos. Someone knew she was asking questions. Sarah stared him down. And what happens if I keep asking? Connor smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. People who look too closely at powerful men tend to see things they wish they hadn't. He handed her a small envelope, no bigger than her palm, a thank you gift. From Mr. Clayton, no strings. Then he turned and walked out. Just like that. Sarah waited until the car disappeared down the road before she opened the envelope. Inside, a check for $50,000. The diner lights buzzed behind her as she stared at the number. She could fix everything with that money. Rent, debt, Noah's medical bills, the broken wheelchair motor. It was a solution to problems that had clawed at her for years. but she didn't smile. She felt sick, because buried inside that envelope wasn't just money, it was silence. Sarah folded the check and placed it in her back pocket, not because she intended to use it, but because some things needed to be kept. Proof. That night, she waited until Noah fell asleep, and then pulled the photos from the drawer again. The little girl in the picture haunted her. Trial 14C. Sarah had no idea what that meant, but she knew where she might start to find out. She didn't sleep. At sunrise, she packed a small bag, took the bus to the city, and walked into the largest library she could find. She asked for medical research archives, and within hours, she had pages spread across the table: patent filings, press releases, obscure medical trial logs, legal statements full of language that twisted the truth into something almost invisible. But there it was, buried deep in a financial document from 3 years ago. Clayton Biomedical Division oversees Pediatric Trial Program 14C, discontinued. Final outcome, unsuccessful. No follow-up, no accountability, just a line of text. Sarah sat there for a long time, barely blinking. They'd tested on children, without consent, and when it failed, they buried it. She had saved the son of a man who had buried someone else's daughter. Her throat burned by the time she stepped outside. The city felt different, louder, harsher. But so did she. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a witness, and now maybe a threat. As she stood near the bus stop, someone tapped her shoulder. She turned. It was a woman, mid-40s, dark eyes, face lined with grief and years of unspoken things. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked. Sarah nodded slowly. The woman pulled a folded photograph from her coat and held it out. Sarah's breath caught it. Was the same girl from the photo in the envelope, but smiling this time. Alive. She was mine, the woman said softly. Her name was Alina. "You're the first person I've met who's even spoken her name out loud." Sarah blinked. "How did you find me?" "I didn't. Someone left a note at my door with your name. I came hoping it was real." There was silence between them, thick and aching. "I think you and I," the woman continued, "have the same enemy." Sarah didn't answer. She just nodded and looked down at the photo again. The road ahead had changed, no longer just about saving one life. Now it was about honoring another, and exposing a man who had built his empire on quiet suffering. Sarah was about to go deeper than she ever intended, but she wouldn't walk away now, not when the truth was calling. Sometimes, the hardest truth to face is that the fight you didn't choose might still be the one you were born to win. Sarah had never seen herself as brave. Survivors rarely do. They just keep going because stopping isn't an option. But that morning, standing beside a grieving mother holding the photo of a child lost to something far colder than fate, it became clear her life had collided with something larger, and turning away now would make her no different than the people who looked the other way when Alina needed them most. They sat on a bench across from the courthouse steps, where sunlight hit the marble with a painful kind of brilliance. The woman, her name was Dahlia, spoke slowly, quietly, like the weight of each word still exhausted her lungs. "My daughter was born with a rare neurological disorder," she explained. "We didn't have the money for treatment. Then one day, this man came to our village with doctors and smiles and promises. He said they would try something new, something cutting edge. He said it might save her." Sarah's hands curled around the photo. "They told us to sign a waiver," Dahlia continued, "but they never translated it. We trusted them." Within weeks, Alina's condition worsened. Then she stopped speaking, and one morning she just didn't wake up. Her voice didn't break. It didn't need to. The silence afterwards said everything. "They took her body," Dahlia whispered. "They said they needed to run tests. We never saw her again." Sarah felt something inside her go still and sharp. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "We did, in our country. But who do you think funded the hospitals there? Who built the clinics? Clayton's money is everywhere." No one wanted to listen. No one ever did. But Sarah was listening now, and something else stirred in her, not just anger, not just guilt, resolve. Dahlia pulled out a second envelope, this one thicker than the first. "Before I left, someone slipped this under my door. I think they want to help, but they're afraid. They said you might be braver than the rest of us." Inside were documents, hundreds of pages, trial records, email exchanges, internal reports, marked confidential. It was a blueprint of corruption. Sarah took a deep breath. "We take this public," Dahlia blinked. "Who would believe us?" "Not everyone. Sarah said, "but someone will." She didn't know exactly where to start, but she knew who had helped people like her before. There was a woman she remembered, from an old news clip, an investigative reporter who'd exposed corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. Her name was Layla Knox. By nightfall, Sarah had found a number. She called from a burner phone, standing on the sidewalk outside the hospital where she once carried Jameson through the doors. The line rang 4 times. Then, "This is Knox." Her voice was sharp. "No nonsense. I have something you're going to want to see," Sarah said. "And if I'm right, it's bigger than anything you've covered." There was a pause. "I'm listening." 2 hours later, they met in the back booth of a shuttered cafe downtown, where the owner let Sarah in after hours. Layla was older than Sarah, expected gray, streaked through her curls, sharp eyes, leather jacket. She moved like someone who'd run toward danger more than once. Sarah handed her the envelope. 10 minutes passed in silence as Layla read. Then she looked up. "This is real." Sarah nodded. "I got it from the mother of one of the victims. There are others, but they're too scared to come forward." "Where did you get involved in this?" "I carried Clayton's son to the hospital, saved his life. I think that's why I'm seeing the other side of him now." Layla leaned back, thoughtful. "This won't be easy. He has lawyers, money, and more reach than you think." "I'm not doing this because it's easy," Sarah said. "I'm doing it because I can't not." That night, Sarah returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. Her chest tightened. She pushed it open, slowly, quietly. Nothing seemed stolen. Nothing was broken, but every drawer had been opened. Every file cabinet rummaged through. Even Noah's medical papers had been disturbed. She checked his room. He was fast asleep, headphones on, oblivious to the quiet chaos left behind. "We're sending a message." She didn't sleep. She stayed up, writing down everything she remembered. Every timeline, every document. She scanned what she could and stored copies in 3 different cloud folders. If they came for her, she wouldn't go quietly. The next morning she walked into Roscoe's and handed her apron to her boss. "I'm done." He blinked. "What? You quitting?" "I'm not quitting," she said, with a strange calmness. "I'm finally starting something that matters." By afternoon, she was in Layla's office. The walls were covered with clippings and string, maps, stories of power, money, justice, or the lack of it. Sarah's documents were spread out like puzzle pieces, waiting to reveal something undeniable. Layla looked at her. "If we publish this, it will make waves, but Clayton won't go down without a fight. Are you ready to be the face of this?" Sarah looked out the window, at the city pulsing with lives and truths and things buried too long. "I carried his son through the cold and the dark without asking for a reward," she said. "Now I'll carry the truth." The moment truth touches air, everything shifts. Sarah had expected backlash. She'd even braced herself for doubt, for name-calling, for strangers twisting her story into something ugly. But nothing prepared her for how fast the machine moved once the article hit. Whispers of silence. Clayton Biomedical's hidden trials. That was the headline. It ran with a side-by-side photo, one of Sarah in her waitress uniform, and one of little Alina, eyes bright and frozen in time. Beneath it, a pull quote from Sarah's interview. "No one should trade a child's future for profit, not even a billionaire." The article exploded within hours. First, it was shared in quiet corners of the internet activist circles, underground forums, watchdog sites. Then it hit a popular true crime podcast. Then a national news outlet picked it up. And then, all eyes were on Sarah. There were cameras outside her apartment. Reporters hounded Roscoe's, her voicemail filled with both praise and threats. Some people called her a hero, others, a liar. But the truth didn't care about approval ratings. It had already started doing its work. Layla's newsroom was inundated with emails, other parents, former employees, even one former lab technician, who offered to testify anonymously. The puzzle wasn't just real, it was massive. Clayton's lawyers moved just as quickly. Within 2 days, Sarah received a cease and desist letter. It arrived by courier, sealed with corporate polish and laced with legal poison. The letter called her claims defamatory, accused her of fraud, demanded she retract everything, and warned that failure to comply would result in swift legal consequences. Sarah read the letter in silence, then calmly folded it and slid it beneath a wobbly table leg in Layla's office. It made the table stop wobbling. That was all it was good for. But something deeper stirred in Sarah that day, not just defiance, but clarity. She hadn't just stepped into a fight. She had become the fight, and if she was going to stand against Clayton, she wouldn't do it quietly. She took Layla's suggestion and agreed to go on camera for an exclusive interview. Lights were hot, the studio quiet, a backdrop of navy blue and the sharp, clinical voice of the host asking the first question. Ms. Mitchell, you were a waitress. You lived paycheck to paycheck. Why risk everything for a story you could have walked away from? Sarah didn't hesitate, because I looked into the eyes of a boy. I carried through the snow and saw the kind of pain no child should know. Then I found out that pain was the cost of someone else's comfort, and I couldn't stay silent knowing there were more children like him, like Alina, who'd never get the chance to be heard. The clip went viral. People began talking, marching, demanding, but for every voice raised in support, there was someone trying to bury the fire. Clayton's PR team rolled out interviews, commercials, even staged a hospital visit with him smiling next to sick children. They painted Sarah as misguided, emotional, and manipulated by journalists. He went on national television and calmly denied everything. The claims are unfortunate and deeply hurtful, he said with a steady gaze. This woman saved my son's life, and for that I will always be grateful. But these accusations are false, and we will take every step necessary to defend the truth. Sarah watched it live, Noah at her side. He sounds like he believes it. Noah said quietly, he believes money can erase anything. Sarah replied, but not this time. And just when it seemed like the storm might turn against her, new voice entered the ring, one Clayton hadn't expected. Jameson. The boy she had carried. Now healthy. Speaking publicly for the first time, at a press conference, flanked by his mother and two attorneys, Jameson stepped up to the microphone. He was only 10, but he spoke like someone who had seen the world too clearly, too young. My dad told me to forget what happened that night, he began. He told me never to talk about the woman who helped me. But I remember everything. Sarah watched the screen, her heart in her throat. She carried me through the snow. Jameson said, she didn't ask who my dad was. She didn't ask for money. She just ran. My mom was crying. I was sick. I couldn't walk, and she didn't let go. He looked up, straight into the camera. I believe her, and I'm sorry for the things my dad did to kids like Alina. I think it's time someone told the truth. So, I am. The room went silent. The world didn't. It roared. Support flooded in. Donations for the victims' families began pouring into a fund Layla helped organize. More former employees came forward. A class action lawsuit was filed. Congressional hearings were scheduled, and Sarah, she kept going, but not without fear. One night, after a long interview, Sarah returned home to find her window broken. Nothing stolen, just a single word carved into her front door. Enough. She stood there for a long time, staring at it, breathing slow. Then she went inside, packed a small bag, and took Noah to a safe house Layla had arranged. Some fights, she now understood, don't end when the truth is spoken. They end when the silence is no longer an option for anyone. And as Sarah lay awake that night, beside the brother she'd raised, and the cause she now lived for, she realized something she hadn't dared believe before. She wasn't alone anymore, and she was far from finished. Some stories aren't finished when the noise fades. They live on in the choices people make when no one's watching. The trial began 3 months after. Jameson's statement shook the media. Cameras lined the steps of the federal courthouse every morning, broadcasting updates to a world that still hadn't decided whether to believe in the girl who once carried a child through a snowstorm or the man whose money had paved highways, hospitals, and headlines. Sarah sat near the front row every day, beside Dahlia and 3 other mothers who had traveled thousands of miles for this moment. Layla sat nearby, always scribbling notes, eyes sharp, heart wide open, and across the room surrounded by lawyers, perfectly groomed, expressionless at Clayton Roth. Even now, he didn't flinch, he didn't look at Sarah, didn't acknowledge Jameson when he entered. His gaze stayed fixed on the bench, as if he could will the world to forget the stories being unfolded piece by piece, before a jury of 12. The first day was all clinical language and cold data, medical terms, trial records, redacted memos, but by the 3rd day, it was Alina's voice heard in an old birthday video, echoing across the courtroom that changed everything. She wanted to be a doctor. Dahlia whispered to Sarah afterward. She said she was going to heal the world. Sarah didn't speak. She just held her hand. Then came Sarah's turn. She stood before the courtroom, palms slightly shaking, heart steady. "I didn't plan to be here," she began. "I didn't wake up hoping to go to war with someone powerful. I just did what I thought any person should do when they see a child in pain. I carried a boy who couldn't breathe to safety. And because I didn't walk away, I found something darker than I ever expected." She paused. "This isn't about revenge. This is about responsibility. Because sometimes, the people who suffer the most are the ones with no one left to speak for them. So today, I speak for them." Her words were quiet, but they landed with weight. The courtroom listened. The world did too. And by the final week of testimony, the scales had begun to tip. A former lab director broke down on the stand, admitting she'd falsified results under pressure from the board. An intern leaked emails showing executives knew about the complications in pediatric trials but kept pushing for faster approval. The evidence was too large, too real, too human to ignore. Then, in a twist no one saw coming, Jameson's mother took the stand. She testified under immunity, her voice brittle, her pain raw. She spoke of years of silencing herself to protect her son, of being told to play the part, of the guilt that consumed her every time she saw Sarah's name in the news. "My son got better," she said, "but other children didn't, and that's not something I can live with anymore." When the jury went into deliberation, the world held its breath. Sarah and Noah sat on a bench outside the courthouse, the same way they used to sit outside Roscoe's after long shifts, except now, they weren't invisible. Now, people nodded at them, smiled, offered thanks, not because she was famous, but because she reminded them that one person could still matter. The verdict came on the 6th day, guilty, got not just on one count, but 7. Negligence, fraud, willful endangerment, ethics violations, tampering with data, failure to report adverse effects, obstruction of justice. Clayton Roth was sentenced to 25 years without parole. His company's assets were frozen. A restitution fund was established for the families of all trial victims, both known and undiscovered. And in an unprecedented ruling, Sarah Mitchell was awarded the Presidential Medal of Courage for her role in exposing the truth. But the real reward didn't come in gold or headlines. It came on a warm afternoon 6 weeks later, when Sarah stood in the middle of a brand new community center, bearing a simple wooden sign, "The Alina Hope Foundation, in memory of every voice silenced to soon." Children ran across the grass outside. Inside, volunteers helped families apply for medical care. There were books, translators, doctors who listened, and in one corner of the center, framed quietly on the wall, was a photograph of Sarah carrying Jameson. Grainy, taken by a bystander, but forever part of history now. Came by with coffee, smiling. "It's beautiful," she said. "But this isn't the end for you, is it?" Sarah shook her head. "It's the beginning. People are still afraid to speak. I want to help them find their voices." "You planning to run for office or something?" Sarah laughed for the first time in a while. "No, I'm planning to stay loud." Noah rolled up beside them, holding a folder of drawings he'd made for the kids in the center. "I think we should build one of these in every city," he said. "We will," Sarah replied, "one truth at a time." That night, Sarah walked the halls of the foundation alone, touching the walls, breathing in the silence. Not long ago, she was a waitress no one noticed, carrying plates, carrying pain, carrying a boy through a storm without expecting anything in return. But now, she carried something different, hope, and this time it was contagious. As she stepped outside, the stars looked clearer than she remembered, the wind gentler, the night no longer something to fear. Because when one person dares to stand, others follow. And Sarah Mitchell had done more than stand. She had changed the world.